I never thought that the person I trusted most in my life could destroy everything in one fell swoop. I always believed my sister, Mara, was my closest ally, the one who had my back through every hardship. That belief was shattered when she spun a web of lies accusing me of selling drugs, a crime I never committed, and got me kicked out of the only home I'd ever known. I'm writing this now as a way to document every twisted betrayal and every calculated step I took toward my final, irreversible revenge. And let me be clear, betrayal is unforgivable, and neither will I ever grant pardon for what she did. When I was a kid, Mara and I were inseparable. Growing up in a modest household, our parents did their best, even if we didn't always feel loved. Mara always took it upon herself to protect me from bullies at school and to share whatever little we had. I admired her resilience and her cunning ability to manipulate situations to our advantage. That bond, however, was built on illusions, a facade Mara maintained until the day she chose self-interest over family loyalty. I remember that fateful afternoon with unnerving clarity. I had just returned from a part-time job at a local diner, tired but proud of earning my own money. My mother greeted me with a warm smile as I stepped through the door, and for a brief moment, I felt that sense of belonging I'd craved since childhood. But that fleeting moment was ripped away by Mara's shrill laughter echoing down the hall. I didn't understand what was happening until I overheard her on the phone, her voice icy and detached as she recounted details that painted me as a dealer, a criminal who had been peddling drugs behind everyone's backs. The next morning, my life turned into a nightmare. Rumors spread like wildfire, and soon the police were at our door. My parents, blinded by Mara's lies and the overwhelming pressure of scandal, decided that I was too much of a liability to keep around. I was forced out with nothing but the clothes on my back and a broken heart. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound, and I knew I had to survive alone. I carried the shame and the bitterness with me, each day feeding the resolve that I would someday have my revenge. The first few months on the streets were brutal. I moved from one odd job to another, scrubbing floors and working late nights just to keep a roof over my head. The loneliness was overwhelming, and every time I thought of Mara's cold betrayal, my stomach churned with a dark mix of sorrow and anger. I spent countless nights planning how I could reclaim the power that was so cruelly stolen from me. I wasn't just going to forgive or forget. I was going to make her pay, and I'd do it in a way that ensured she'd never see me coming. My break came when I found work as a mechanic at a rundown garage on the outskirts of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of control over my life. Over time, I started to reconnect with old friends who knew the real me, not the criminal my sister had painted me as. They reminded me of my worth and fueled my determination to rise above the darkness Mara had thrust upon us all. I began saving every spare dollar, meticulously planning my return, not to the family that had shunned me, but to a version of life where I could rewrite my story on my own terms. In the midst of my personal resurrection, life threw another curveball. My mother fell gravely ill. It was a slow descent into a state of debilitating weakness that robbed her of the ability to care for herself. News of her sickness spread quickly, and soon my estranged parents were begging me to come home. They claimed remorse, tears welling in their eyes as they recounted the empty nights and the echoing silence of the house since I'd left. But I knew better. Their sudden change of heart reeked of convenience, a way to cling to the life they once had without confronting the lies that had cost me everything. I agreed to visit, not out of forgiveness or reconciliation, but because I needed to see for myself how far my parents had fallen. The day I drove back, a maelstrom of emotions threatened to overwhelm me. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside, the betrayal churned like a dark storm. I arrived at the house to find it in a state of disarray, a once warm home now reduced to a shell of regret and bitter memories. My father looked older, his once stern face now lined with remorse and defeat. My mother lay in a hospital bed, frail and haunted by memories of happier days. The reunion was awkward and laced with silent accusations. My parents explained, between choked sobs and stuttering apologies, how they had been manipulated by Mara's lies. They painted me as the innocent victim, a scapegoat who had been punished for crimes he did not commit. But I saw right through their facades. Their pleas were not born from genuine remorse. They were desperate attempts to erase the past and reclaim the security of family unity. And I had long since learned that loyalty must be earned, and trust once broken is never fully restored. For weeks, I oscillated between visiting my ailing mother and keeping my distance from the toxic environment that my parents had created. Every time I looked into my mother's eyes, I felt a pang of guilt and regret for what had happened. But the thought of Mara, the cold, calculating saboteur of my life, kept the fire of vengeance burning inside me. I spent long nights strategizing, piecing together every moment of evidence that would expose her lies for what they were, the desperate machinations of someone unwilling to accept their own shortcomings. I began by tracking down the few people who had known Mara long before she turned into the person capable of such deceit. Old friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives provided me with fragments of a narrative that was entirely different from the one she had spun. They spoke of a girl who was always desperate for attention, who envied the affection our parents lavished on me. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged. Mara had always resented me for being the golden child, the one who inadvertently overshadowed her. Her lies about my involvement in drugs were nothing more than a twisted attempt to reclaim the spotlight, even if it meant destroying me in the process. Armed with this knowledge, I set out to gather undeniable evidence of her deceit. I contacted the police officer who had first taken my statement, the one who had dismissed my protests as the delusions of a wayward youth. Through discreet inquiries and careful research, I uncovered records that proved my innocence, receipts, witness statements, even surveillance footage from the diner where I had worked. Every piece of evidence was meticulously collected, forming a damning portfolio against Mara. The more I learned, the more my resolve hardened. I was no longer a victim. I was an avenger, and my mission was clear. I spent countless sleepless nights poring over the details, connecting dots that pointed directly at Mara's betrayal. The evidence was irrefutable, and it was time to act. I reached out to an old contact who had since become a reputable journalist, someone who had a knack for digging up the dirt on corrupt individuals. I laid everything out on the table, every lie, every manipulation, every shattered piece of trust. My story was raw, unfiltered, and brimming with the kind of evidence that would force even the most stone-hearted skeptics to take notice. The article that eventually hit the newsstands was explosive. Mara's carefully constructed narrative crumbled under the weight of hard facts and testimonies. As the story unfolded in front of the public's eyes, Mara's reputation disintegrated, and she found herself isolated and discredited. I watched from a safe distance, satisfaction welling up inside me as the world learned the truth about the woman who had once been my sister. The once adoring public turned its back on her, and the lies that had once sustained her power evaporated into nothingness. But revenge is never a one-time act. It is a process, a series of calculated moves that leave no room for forgiveness. Mara, desperate and broken, tried to salvage what little dignity she had left by apologizing to my parents, attempting to weave her way back into the remnants of our family. I attended one such gathering at our childhood home, the place where memories both sweet and bitter converged in every crevice. The atmosphere was heavy with the stench of regret and stale apologies. My father's voice trembled as he implored for forgiveness, his eyes pleading for a return to the old days. But I had moved on from that naive yearning for familial unity. I wasn't there to mend broken bonds. I was there to witness the final collapse of her false reality. I confronted Mara in front of everyone. My voice, cold and unwavering, recounted every lie, every betrayal, every calculated act of treachery she had ever committed. I laid bare the evidence, each word a hammer blow against the fragile facade she had built over the years. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension and disbelief. For the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of remorse in her eyes, an acknowledgement of the irreversible damage she had caused. But remorse is a luxury I could no longer afford. Her betrayal was unforgivable, and no amount of regret could ever justify the ruin she had unleashed upon me. The fallout was swift. The media, now armed with undeniable proof of Mara's deceit, descended upon her like vultures. Her reputation was irreparably tarnished, and even our parents could no longer hide behind the veil of her lies. They pleaded for another chance, for the restoration of a family that had once been whole. But I knew that trust, once shattered beyond repair, is a mirror that can never be put back together. I had already taken the first step in reclaiming my life, and there was no turning back. Every day that passed, I grew stronger, more determined to forge a future free of the venom that Mara had instilled in our lives. I channeled my pain and anger into rebuilding everything that had been taken from me. I enrolled in night classes to finish my education, started a small business repairing cars, and gradually built a network of genuine friends who valued truth over pretense. Each milestone was a small victory, a silent rebuke to the people who had once cast me aside. I learned that true strength is born out of adversity, and that the sweetest revenge is not the destruction of your enemy, but the reclamation of your own dignity and power. As months turned into years, I became a different person, a person who had endured unimaginable betrayal and emerged victorious, scarred, but unbowed. I rarely crossed paths with Mara again. When I did, it was in passing, in the silent acknowledgement that the past was unchangeable and that some wounds are too deep to ever fully heal. I watched her spiral further into isolation, her desperate attempts to regain what she had lost met with cold indifference by those who once admired her. In her downfall, I found a grim satisfaction, knowing that justice had been served in a way that was both ruthless and fair. The final blow came unexpectedly. One quiet afternoon, as I was closing up my workshop, I received an anonymous message, a link to a video file. With cautious curiosity, I watched as the camera panned over a decrepit apartment building. There, in a shadowed room, was Mara, isolated and alone, speaking in a halting voice about regrets and lost opportunities. The video was raw, unedited, and a final testament to the person she had become. It was evidence of her self-destruction, a bitter epilogue to the life she had ruined by betraying her own flesh and blood. I didn't feel the need to respond or to seek closure from her apologies. The revenge had been complete long before that day, and I had no interest in reopening wounds that I had fought so hard to close. Now, as I write these words, I know that some may call my actions ruthless or unforgiving. But betrayal leaves scars that time can never erase, and sometimes the only way to reclaim your life is to let those who wronged you face the consequences of their own actions. I have no illusions about the past or the people I once loved. I have learned that trust, once betrayed, is a luxury I can no longer afford. The price of betrayal is steep, and no apology or fleeting moment of regret can ever restore what has been lost. In the end, my journey was never about seeking forgiveness from a family that had abandoned me. It was about finding the strength to stand on my own, to rise above the ashes of deceit and rebuild my life brick by brick. I transformed my pain into power, my sorrow into success, and my anger into the fuel that drove me to reclaim my identity. The memories of that betrayal, though haunting, now serve as a reminder of how far I have come and how much I have overcome. I often wonder if Mara ever truly understood the magnitude of her actions. Did she realize that her lies not only cost me my home, but nearly destroyed the very essence of who I was? I doubt it. Her mind was too clouded by jealousy and the need for attention to grasp the irreversible damage she had wrought. And even if she did, that realization came too late. The chain reaction of events, my expulsion from the family, the loss of trust, the painful isolation, had already set the stage for a downfall that would spare no one from facing harsh truths. Now, as I continue to build a life defined by resilience and hard-won victories, I look back on that period with a mixture of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for the lost time and the broken family, and relief that I was able to reclaim my life and forge a path forward. There is no comfort in forgiveness when trust is irreparably damaged. There is only the cold, hard satisfaction of knowing that you have overcome the worst of humanity. And in my case, that satisfaction came in the form of a well-executed, silent revenge, a reminder that those who betray you will eventually have to live with the consequences of their choices. This is my story, raw and unfiltered, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, even in the face of betrayal and unimaginable loss. I share it not to evoke pity, but to serve as a warning. Betrayal is a path with no return, and the price you pay is often far greater than you can ever imagine. I stand here today, not as a victim, but as a survivor, someone who has turned every bitter tear into a stepping stone towards a future defined by truth, resilience, and an unyielding commitment to justice. Mara's name, once whispered in our home with an air of familiarity, is now a byword for treachery, a symbol of the darkness that can reside in even the most unexpected places. I have no wish to see her again, no desire to reconcile the shattered pieces of a past that was never meant to be whole. Instead, I move forward with my head held high, each day a silent testament to the fact that true strength is not measured by forgiveness, but by the courage to rebuild, to rise, and to let the scars of betrayal serve as a permanent reminder that some wounds are simply too deep to ever be mended. My life is now defined by a series of hard-earned victories, a modest workshop, a small circle of loyal friends, and the quiet knowledge that I have taken control of my destiny. Every morning, as I drive to work, I pass by the remnants of the house I once called home, and I'm reminded of the painful lesson I learned. Never allow someone's lies to dictate your future. I chose to let my past fuel my ambition rather than derail it. And in that choice, I discovered that revenge, when executed with precision and without mercy, is not about destruction. It's about reclaiming what was once stolen. I share this story to remind anyone who has been betrayed by someone they loved that you have the power to rise above the darkness. I never forgave Mara, and I never will. But in doing so, I found a strength I never knew I possessed, a strength that allowed me to transform my pain into purpose. The scars of betrayal will always be a part of me, but they no longer define me. Instead, they serve as a reminder that even in the most treacherous of times, you can carve out a future where you are in control, where the echoes of deceit are drowned out by the sound of your own resolve. I am not asking for sympathy or redemption. I am simply stating the truth. Betrayal is unforgivable, and the path to reclaiming your life is paved with unwavering determination, ruthless precision, and the refusal to let anyone else dictate your worth. Mara's lies may have set off a chain of events that nearly destroyed me, but in the end, they also forged me into the person I am today. A person who knows that revenge is not an act of anger, but a necessary step toward reclaiming one's life and identity. This is the story of how I was betrayed, how I rebuilt my life from the ruins of deception, and how I ultimately found a measure of justice in a world that often seems all too willing to let lies prevail. I hope that in sharing my journey, those who have suffered similar betrayals may find the strength to stand up, to fight back, and to realize that while some wounds never fully heal, they can serve as the foundation for a future built on truth, resilience, and the unbreakable will to survive. In the end, I'm still here, scarred, yes, but also stronger and wiser than I ever thought possible. The lessons I learned in those dark days have become the pillars upon which I now stand. And while I will never forget the treachery that Mara inflicted upon me, I have learned to live with it, not as a burden, but as a reminder that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living a life that no amount of betrayal can ever tarnish.